Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Today we are going to do something a little bit different, and we are going to talk about something that I'm really excited about in two ways. One is the topic itself, which if you were seeing this on video, you are seeing, which is the newly opened National Museum for Peace and Justice, which opened about a month ago. And it's the nation's first memorial dedicated to the legacy of slavery and lynching and Jim Crow. And it's a very significant new piece of the cultural landscape in the United States. And I'm also excited to talk about this because I am here with my guest, Curtis Mitchelson, who is a listener to the Daily Evolver and who wrote me. So we're talking to a listener and he's bringing me this whole story, and he's been a supporter, and a part of this has been his whole life's work and passion. And so welcome, Curtis Mitchelson.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure. Honor, truly.
Yay. So you're in Orlando right now.
Yes, I am.
And you have been, why don't you just give us an overview of how the picture we saw, by the way, which is beautiful, you took. Mm-hmm. And you were there at the opening. Yeah. And you have been supporting this and part of this. So give us a little bit of an overview of how that all
or how I got there. Yeah. A little bit of the journey towards that point, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it really, that moment kind of crystallizes, and that's a really powerful image for me of a journey I've been on for a couple decades, and maybe my whole life. I was born in Miami to two parents of the civil rights movement. They opened the first integrated church in Miami. So I'm named after the Black preacher, in fact, Reverend Dr. Curtis McDowell. So my earliest memories of race and culture and everything were in a Black church. It was integrated because we were the one white family, right? So we integrated the church. And so I'm raised by it, that way. Like a lot of kids growing up in Miami or any part of the United States, went through integrated high school experiences, but they were, at moments rough, and we were past, this is the 70s, past the kind of outright fights and riots that were going on, but we were kind of a peaceful, more or less coexistence. And it went on and kind of moved into other careers, but along the way, I realized that this work never left me. And one bit of political awakening for me was living in Nicaragua for just a couple months out of college, and then coming back and realizing there's just something that we as a country don't see. And that's the footprint we have outside the world. But there's another thing we don't see, which is the footprint we've had here internally on people. There's just so much we don't see. And that's just been the theme over and over. And so a lot of my work and change work and professionally is just helping organizations or individuals or groups pull back these curtains and look at things that we haven't wanted to look at. So what that monument does in a really profound way is invite us as a country to look at this thing, slavery, and its aftermath over these years, and just take in.
Yeah. And, and me too, I mean, I knew about slavery, of course. Yeah. But you know what I didn't really fully get my arms around at all was the Jim Crow, the lynchings, that between I think 1880 or something and 1950, this project, and it's the Equal Justice Initiative who put this on, right? They have documented 4,400 lynchings in 800 counties, and they think that that's a fraction,
right? Yes.
And that was a sustained, we would call that a terror campaign,
correct?
Right now. Because really each of these were public, these were often extra legal or just sham legal, and they were meant to send a signal of oppression. Yeah, and so that's the scope of that is new to me, and the museum really transmits that with these hanging pillars. Yes, good Lord.
There's two components here. The museum is actually a separate building. What you saw and what you showed at the beginning is the memorial. So that's the the field, the whole architecture you walk through. There's a separate museum. Yeah, this is the memorial. No accident, the pillars here are hanging. And maybe to give a little context, each pillar at the top is a county in mostly the southern United States. And underneath the county name, it says the names of those who were lynched, right? So it's inviting us to personalize this. Maybe I can just describe the experience of walking
please.
through it. So picture both whites, blacks, young, old, students, seniors walking through this, entering. And when you first enter the space, the markers, those columns are at eye level. It's just sort of at your level. And as you walk into it, into the interior, they get higher and higher till eventually you're halfway around and they're above you like this. Yes. And you just pause at each one. It's if you've ever been to something like a Holocaust memorial, you know what this experience feels like. If you haven't, the range of emotions, anger is certainly in there. Sadness, there was spontaneous crying. There were people who were finding their own family names. So I remember a elderly black woman being wheeled in a wheelchair drawn to a very particular marker. She touched the icon, found the family name, and they started singing. They were singing spirituals, and we all just formed around them for a while. These things just happen in this space.
Yeah.
You're not removed. You were put inside. This is the interior, and this is really looking at the shadow of our country. The shadow of this is shadow material that our history books glossed over. We might have seen a line in the history books about lynchings, but you echoed exactly how I felt when I entered this work 15, 20 years ago and started a little project in Orlando looking at what happened here. Why didn't they tell me about this? It's like picking up Howard Zinn's book, the people's history of the United States. It's those sort of material that make you realize there's just so many more layers that we weren't exposed to. So you go through this, and by the time you're halfway around this 360 degrees, you just need to sit. And there's some benches at that moment, and I sat down, I remember, next to a white woman. We didn't say anything, but we just kind of reached, and I said, I just need to hold your hand. And she said, yeah. And, just silently watching, taking it all in. Then I found the county where I'm from, Orange County, Florida. Another layer, right? Because now this would be like, what would be the parallel? If you're German going through, your hometown of Germany, and you come across one of those things they call a Stolpersteine. Gunther Dinmig, the artist in Germany, did a project where everywhere a Jewish family lived, he put their name in stone, but in brass, in front of the doorway of the house. Right? It's like coming across it in your own neighborhood. Right? So to find Orange County, Florida, to see those names, and knowing what it means, and what they've set up here is really a series of projects. Every one of those columns represent a future project for each county to get involved in.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's how long.
And looking into the history of their own county and adding names as that, so it becomes an ongoing revelation.
So the memorial is it's like the clearinghouse. It's the center. But to go back to that image you showed at the beginning, the outside is all of those, you see those things laying, maybe you can pull the image back up, but it's where they're laying down sideways, almost like tombs, caskets. Those are the duplicate columns. So Orange County, there is one of those out there too. Our county gets to bring that home at some point, but not yet. See, there is work we must do. So our task force, our Orange County EGI task force, yeah, there you go. So those that are lying in repose there are duplicates of the columns inside.
Oh, interesting.
And this was by design. So the architectural vision here is this is interactive over a very long time span. So picture 10, 20, 30 years down the track. As counties do the work, they claim those and bring them home.
Yeah.
So eventually when that field is clear, we're clear.
Yeah.
We have done the work, right? That's what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you originally contacted me, one of the things that you were most enthusiastic about, and because you have an integral view of this, and I'd like to unpack that. But the thing that struck me was that the emphasis on reconciliation
Yeah.
not punishment.
Right.
This is designed to move the ball forward.
Right. Right.
And address that. And actually, if you want to, you also suggested that one of the things that you could help put this in context with is the lovely wedding that we experienced last weekend between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to start with the global context, but feel free.
Yeah, well, that is a neat place to start. Why not? That was integrated, literally, right? There were so many interesting contrasts there, and one of the things that struck me was the African American preacher bringing the power of love, the transforming power of love, and he used the S word, slavery. Right? He brought in slave narratives. He talked about the way the belief that love would prevail. Right? It wasn't about vengeance. There was a longer game being played, a much longer, bigger game. And as he just kept going, you look at the pans to the audience and the royal family, and there was a little bit of, you could almost detect a bit of squirming, because I mean, England is no stranger to imperialism, right? And their part in slavery, and their part in chopping up the Middle East and Africa to bite-sized colonial proportions, right, for extracting resources. And so he was hitting very deeply that same chord that we hit when we do this work here. But when you add the redeeming power of love to it and say there is a larger game being played, we would call it, as integralists, the evolutionary story. There's something bigger playing out here. That changes the character of it.
Yeah, here's how I tried to think about it is as integralists, we want to do two things in a way. We want to be able to relate to the particulars of any story and anybody's story, including our own. And we also want to have a cosmocentric view where we can see this planet and us people and the heritage of our history and our karma and how rotten we've been to each other in so many ways throughout history. Just a catastrophe, evolving catastrophe of all that.
Right.
And that this karma has shape.
Yeah.
And it resonates.
Right.
And so again, we move then from that sort of just general understanding. We all have that. It's resonating in all of us. The particular American story.
Right.
And how that karma moves from generation to generation on both sides of the street, white, black,
absolutely.
and
sure.
And until we have at this point now the marriage of the white prince and the mixed woman and all of that, and of course amazing progress in terms of racial integration and just particularly in the exteriors and the legal side of the street.
Yeah.
Our hearts and minds are lagging, but this is part of working on that, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a cynical lens. I have a good friend, African American, and as much as he loved the whole experience, his more cynical take on it was, if she had been a few shades darker, it might have been a different experience.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, can we not say that? I mean, maybe not actually.
Right. Man, I
God
said,
bless them.
She's beautiful no matter how many shades of dark she is. By society's definition of beauty, she is gorgeous. And I think any shade she would have been accepted. Which gets into a different layer of oppression.
but at any rate, so this idea of reconciliation, and
Absolutely.
You're putting this in a global context of reconciliation projects that have happened in other places, and why don't you help us with that?
Yeah, and another phrase we often hear is restorative justice or transformative justice. Yeah. I mean, South Africa was a beautiful model. We saw that come out of, the post-apartheid with Desmond Tutu and the reconciliation commissions. And if people don't know that story, essentially either we're trading information, you will tell us the truth for a reconciliation. We will not punish you, but you must come clean. That's the pattern. There's something very powerful.
So people who murdered somebody or were involved in some sort of violence or
black and
antisocial behavior,
right,
that they got to confess
Yes,
and in some public way without punishment.
correct.
And that sort of call forth forgiveness if you got it in you.
Yes, yes. I was in South Africa on a business conference actually, but I couldn't help but ask a lot of questions about this when I was there, right? And he's just a young business guy coming up, and he works for a bank. But his earliest experiences from diapers forward were post-apartheid South Africa, and I saw the way he interacted. I know when someone that's white has done the work, they've really got true black friendships, he does, and I like he just describes when Mandela passed away, the love in that stadium, black and white. I mean, something was set in motion in South Africa
Mm-hmm.
that's probably going to carry them through what's going on right now with their existing political unrest, but there is a deep wellspring of trust.
Right.
Not everybody, but enough, and
Yeah.
I think that comes out of those truth and reconciliation.
Yeah, and that's also, again, when we could take a bigger view, we can see that this process is, the pendulum does swing back and forth, but
Right.
the clock itself moves.
Right.
And so we
Yeah.
can see that, yeah, so the stadium was full of love. That's from an integral perspective, a collective state experience.
Right.
States are temporary, but
Yep.
they also peel away an onion skin that gets us closer to that being stable.
Yes. Yes.
And because we cut the groove.
Right.
And so that's there, that's not going away. And yet, and then, it gets messy again. And yet it's kind of a messy fight forward.
Absolutely. I give you one other example. I was in Argentina. My wife and I just took a little vacay. It was her birthday, and she always wanted to go to Buenos Aires. And we had a great time, 10 days in Buenos Aires. Well, it turns out we landed there the day after Las Madres de los Desaparecidos, the mothers of the disappeared, held a huge rally. If people don't know the story, just Google the Dirty War of Argentina, and you'll know that in the 1970s, there was massive assassinations, mostly of students, all left-wing targeted at left-wing families, and many just they were dumped out of airplanes. They were thrown into pits. I mean, this was massive numbers of people disappeared. They think up between 10 and 30,000 people.
Right. Yeah.
The women today who are those mothers are the grandmothers, okay? And this country is still processing it, but the way they were doing it really struck me. It's done in the art. In the street, there's an image of the banner, the la bandera, that the women would wear. That's the iconic image of this movement. It was everywhere, spray painted everywhere. There are conversations going on with younger people that are 30, 40s that have grew up after the dictatorship and realized they were adopted. So some of these kids, babies at least, the babies were brought into right-wing families. So the parents were killed, but the babies were adopted. Now there's a national blood bank where kids today, grown up, can actually find out who were my real parents. And they discover their parents were killed and their adoptive parents were part of the killing. Now, those are two huge things to process, but they are going through that as a country and creating ways to help their fellow citizens through this. Now, that's several decades on from the Dirty War, right? That's still getting processed.
Well, and you're saying that with this equal justice initiative behind this museum,
Yeah,
that they have a similar kind of bottom-up strategy.
absolutely.
And tell us about that. Some of that's being transferred here.
Yeah, sure. And one of the ways it starts bottom up, all of these start with the word truth. It starts with information, or today's parlance, we call it data, right? Like, in other words, there was a spreadsheet. I remember the first time I saw this spreadsheet about 10, 15 years ago. It was being pulled together by academics and scholars that were studying this pattern of lynchings. But they had to compile these lists because the Tuskegee Institute had their list. The NAACP, which had tracked lynchings across the South in the late 1900s, 10s, the 20s, the 30s, they had theirs. They had to bring these together. EJI inherited all that work, and it starts with this list of names. This is the data. And the dates and the location. So it's names, dates, and locations. When you look at that spreadsheet, I mean, it's data, but these are families, and you picture each one as one of those public events that you described earlier, where whole communities would come out in a picnic-like atmosphere, which how they were often described. And there were many postcards that were taken. There were souvenirs. I mean, you don't find these often, but they do show up where body parts were taken as souvenirs. And the pictures, the most...
We're talking about these lynchings,
yes,
sometimes public burnings.
Oh, they were always public. The very nature of it was
Yeah.
to be public.
Yeah.
The one in Orlando, July Perry in 1920, was clearly pulled through the Black community as to make a statement. And in our case, November 3rd, it was the day after the election. And
No, this is, I mean, this is sort of generic red, actually.
Right.
You know, you have public
is.
executions. The idea is terror. You drag the body through the streets or hang it from the lamppost or from the
as
bridge.
red as it can get, right, in every sense of the word. So yeah, it's public, and in the case of July Perry, there was a sign that hung, according to the Chicago Defender, the Black newspaper at the time, which didn't have a reporter on the scene, but this sounds plausible. This is what we do to N-words who vote. Okay, so whether it was economic, you're getting out of line economically, or politically, there is a place, there is a limit what people were allowed to do, and so these. The images that most scare me or just leave me haunted are the ones with the kids, where you look at a postcard of a lynching and you see the kids in these photos who are clearly brought there. Look, Johnny, look at this. And there's a very tortured smile on their face. And when you go back to what we've inherited and what kind of collective trauma has been passed down or in some way inherited, this karma, I feel it. I relate to it on some level as a white person. Black folks feel it. The way this work started for me locally, maybe this will just crystallize it. I have a really good friend. He's African American. And I was involved in some dialogues around racism in a Unitarian Universalist church. Very good folks, good conversations. But didn't know a lot about our local history. Had no idea there was something, the Ocoee massacre, that this had happened here, right? Just didn't know about it. So this good friend of mine had a great voice. He had a radio voice, and I had a friend in radio. And I said, Otis, man, you really need to, this is your break. So I connected him with my friend who was in the station. Otis went there one time, maybe twice, and he never went back. And I thought at the time, well, I'd do a favor for a friend. Well, what is that? Why didn't he go? I mean, it was like, I'm putting it on him. I extended myself to help this guy out. And what did he do? Well, it took me a year or two later to where in that dialogue on racism, someone, a different person, Black person in our community came and said, well, what about the Ocoee massacre? And all these white folks look around like, what are you talking about? We know Ocoee, it's a subdivision of Orlando. It's about 10 miles west of us. What are you talking about? Oh, you don't know? And that's prompted me to dig in. And then I went back to Otis and he said, Curtis, it was a pretty intimidating place. The sheriff followed me in, and this is now talking about mid 1990s. Okay. I felt very watched. I was there at midnight and they followed me out of town. And when I heard other African Americans telling me this story, what was it like to grow up in Orlando? And they said, we never drove through Ocoee at night. Why? Well, we just knew that's not what you did, right? And this was in the 80s, the 90s, right? So then it just hit me like, wow, this is a classic liberal move. I've gone out of my way to help a friend and not realizing the import of what I was sending him into.
Yeah.
No,
so it's really,
it hit me very personally at that point.
Well, and that's always an integral practice in a sense, is to, as best you can, get behind the eyes of another person.
Yeah.
Get in their skin.
Yeah.
And feel what it is to be them.
Yeah.
We could do that. That's actually, God helps us when we have good intentions, and we learn things and we see things.
Yeah.
And so there's the clear difference between what goes on in Argentina, where these are people who are actually involved, or certainly in more recent events, and what we're talking about in terms of the lynchings and slavery. Certainly, it's 5-6 generations ago.
Or
but what?
3, right? Exactly.
Fair enough. Yes, but what are the continued karmic, expressions?
The way I find the work really beautiful and expressed is there was a project in Duluth. You can look into it, the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. So these EJI, to be clear, was not the first to do this. They have really taken it to a whole new level, to a national level. This work has been going on in little pockets, our little work in Ocoee, and there was a gathering of these small groups in the early 2000s where we started to meet each other. And at the time I met the Duluth folks and saw the way they had taken 3 men who were lynched around the same time, 1920, 21, 22. They said, there was 1,000 people that came out to that lynching. There will be 1,000 Duluth citizens, or at least, or more. They had more turnout to march in honor of these men. And they built a civic space, and it's gorgeous. Today it's the farmer's market. It's, it's where you might come after the Charlottesville thing and Trump says something abhorrent and people rally there, right? This is a very powerful civic space, but very small, space of a house. But what was said the day that they had that march and they pulled, the veil off of this beautiful designed civic space, I think it was the grandson of one of the perpetrators. He's a scholar, he's a professor today of English or history, speaking, embodying the past and embodying the ancestors and saying, this is my commitment, right? It's like trying to clear something. You feel this, it's palpable. And we're all speaking for people who have long gone. You're right, they're long gone. But there's something waiting to be said. That's what's happening here. And the Black folks in this movement say it too. My friend Josie talks about the ancestors, and it's very powerful. Can I show you a picture of Josie? She wanted to be on this interview, but I said, I think it was just going to be you and I, but I'd love to bring her face into this.
Sure,
and
you bet.
Her energy. Yeah. Let me show you just a couple images I took from my trip up to Montgomery. This is the very opening, and I think folks should know Brian Stevenson is the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative. Jesse Jackson was sitting right in front of me, so you see.
Oh, I see the back of his head.
Yeah. At one point, they described this event as the royalty of the civil rights movement. I mean, everybody, if there was anyone, was at this event. It was really quite a celebratory atmosphere. Let me jump past. I want to just share the way it ended, and this is what's beautiful too, why it felt integral in another way. Weaving arts, weaving music, love, celebration, right? So we're not going around, oh God, there was 4,000 lynchings the whole week, right? The concert, called the Concert for Peace and Justice, had all these great artists. Some folks may know John Baptiste, he's the guy that leads the band for the the Colbert Show, right? We're all on stage. This is Josie. This is my friend, Josione Fade. She's meeting there. We're just hanging out before the concert gets started. That's Goodman.
What a profile. My goodness, she looks like Cleopatra.
She's just become a Yoruba priestess. So talk about someone integrating ancient traditions. And she's a sommelier here in Central Florida. So we had an we had an event last night, and she just lit up the crowd. It was a business event, and I had her come pour wine. It was World Product Day, for those who are curious. Josie just lit up the crowd, and she is. This is the energy of this concert. And by the way, she's talking to the brother of, I think it was Goodman. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, of the 3 that were killed in the 60s. Right, it was right around the time of Emmett Till. That's their surviving brother. So the kind of folks there's Josie. So this was the fun, the atmosphere. My friend Francis.
And for those of you who are listening, this is a big concert, a big party. Everybody's happy. Everybody's dressed up.
This is the capper event of 2 days of talking about lynchings. Okay,
right.
But talking about the power of the work, what the power of this reconciliation energy, what we can do with it. And the woman in the middle is my good friend Francina, co-founder of the Democracy Forum, the group that we started to do that work on the Ocoee Massacre. The woman that runs the African American History Center in Orlando, her name is Barbara Chandler. So this is the vibe, if you will. And it closed, just imagine this. It was a cameo of Stevie Wonder they brought out on stage at the end of the show. And you'd heard a pin drop. There were 10,000, maybe 15,000 people in the audience. And just when Stevie said, I dare you to atone, to take a year and atone. And then he went in to superstition. He played, it was just we were already on cloud nine. No, this is the friends in the movement. This is what it looks like. It's not solemn work. I don't want people to get the impression this is really dredging up the past. And a lot of people fear it for that. They don't want to.
Well, a lot of people fear it because they don't know what to do.
Right.
They don't feel like they're responsible, and this is where a lot of white people are. It's where I have been.
Yeah.
And it's, when we talk about atonement, I've often heard that described as at-one-ment, the idea of actually be with the whole or be with another person.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to be the key to the city here, is that we want, there's really not much we could do about what happened. But
Right.
what we can do is really see into how it continues to be alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can see into the eyes of each other. And just, again, I've said this before, but it's so powerful to me. It's one of the teachings I got from Chogyam Trungpa, one of the Buddhist Tibetan masters who I studied in Europa. And he would say that if you deeply see in to another human being, there's only one appropriate response. And that is,
Yeah.
It's just hard to be human. I mean, everybody has this story. These karmas are alive in all of us.
Right.
And, if we want to get Buddhist and technical again, the way you burn karma is by actually allowing it to move through you and dropping resistance to it.
Right.
That you do that moment by moment.
Yes.
And person by person and experience by experience. And
absolutely.
You're thereby doing God's work.
Yeah, there's an author I'm really starting to get into, Adrienne Marie Brown, who's written a book called Emergent Strategy, and she's talking about.
Hey, Curtis, why don't you unshare so we could see each other better?
Yeah, absolutely. She's talking about. She calls the book Emergent Strategy.
No, who is this again?
Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of Emergent Strategy. She's talking about what I would call integral activism. We've inherited an approach, I guess. I've been involved in social justice movements most of my life, and there's been a kind of top-down approach to a lot of it. But the power and the creativity is at the bottom. And I see EJI doing this. I mean, they've created a structure. This is a framework for holding the conversation. They got the data to go back to how these things unfold. They pulled all this information together. The funding to physicalize it, because this was not cheap, to create the museum and the memorial through lots of private contributions. And then to set up this very clever approach to say, each county does the work, but they haven't prescribed how we go about doing the work. So the Memphis folks have the Memphis Lynching Project, and they're creating their own approach to it. The folks in Duluth did theirs, and we're evolving ours. And so there's so much freedom at the grassroots level to do the work the way it makes sense for us. So in July 11th, we're going to have a community visioning here. We're inviting a wide, diverse array of folks, pastors, judges, lawyers, teachers, students, right? Not just activists. We're inviting the whole community to the table. We're using the EJI framework to bring this, and we're going to show some of these images, right, from Montgomery. And the question we'll ask is, what are we ready to do? And what does it mean when we're ready? What does it mean when we've done the work and we can bring that column home? Right.
Right on.
The other piece that EJI does is they provide historic markers. So they will put soon enough, probably in the next 6 months, we'll have markers in the ground, which at least say it happened here. And it's a brass, beautifully wrought marker with the appropriate writing. And we want to know Ocoee, and there'll be one in downtown Orlando, but that's just the start. They also have a process of taking soil from the ground where the lynching happened. They're put in the jars, and they are given back to Montgomery, where there is a collection of this earth. There's an embodied quality to this. This is where it's feeling very interior as well as exterior. This is where it takes you inside the work. And then they're saying, now you're going to meet people locally that are different and coming from different places, and you're going to have conflicts, and you're going to work that shit out, and you're going to do this work. And when you've done it, you're going to bring that marker, that final marker home. Imagine that happening across thousands of counties in the southern United States, right? It's going to take a while, but that's what's being set in motion.
It's a beautiful,
yeah,
piece of the puzzle here.
Right. Yeah.
And also, I have to say that it's, from a developmental view, one of the markers of postmodern, but integral as well. Is just this idea of turning towards pain.
Yeah.
Instead of away.
Right.
And so we don't want to explain it away. We don't want to justify. We don't want to, have a drink. We want to actually experience it. And all it wants is to be experienced and seen and felt.
You're correct. We talk about, absolutely. We talk about spiritual bypassing. And there's a way to bypass in this work too. There are shortcuts, and we're not taking. Okay?
You can't skip stages, Curtis.
No. I mean, I love all the people I'm working with locally, but I'll be very honest. Some of them are very different places in the journey than I am, and that's okay, right? Yeah. That's all right. I've been through this a couple iterations now with these local projects.
Yeah,
that's just the way it goes.
Oh man, I mean, working with other human beings. Geez, it's not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you, and part of it is there's just so much online now. There's so many people that are resonating with so many different things and have so many different experiences. And everybody's got a microphone, and everybody wants to be heard, and everybody ought to be heard. And Jesus, Lord, makes me not want to never leave the house.
Right. Makes you want to stay home and do podcasts.
Exactly. From the safety of my end meeting button.
Yeah. This invites us stepping into that danger place, right? And it's risk, but it's high reward. It really is.
Yeah. I
would love, Jeff, if you could come to Orlando, either maybe July 11th or maybe a few months or a year down the road. Report live from where I just think we're going to be in a different place in a year or two.
And you're talking Orlando now, so you're not talking the memorial, you're talking your own county.
Yes, I would love for you to come experience the work here and see what's going on. Or maybe do a little digging of your own. I would encourage you, it's not just the southern United States where lynchings happen, okay? Duluth, Minnesota, Utah, who knows what you'll find in Colorado. And if not a lynching, there's a story there. There's a place for this community. I think you're Boulder, right? Is that where you are?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a place for a community conversation to own something that has been occluded or hidden for a long time. Yeah. Right? Yeah. These projects are there. Yeah.
I appreciate the invitation, and I have to consider if it requires me leaving my house, but I appreciate the invitation. Curtis, thank you, man. Yeah, what a great download. And I really appreciate, first of all, you. And, you could just feel the passion and the chi, the life force.
There, it's happening.
That's coming out in this, and, in this beautiful way, and in this area that really calls for, we're working on the interiors here now, folks. We got the laws, whatever, but the hearts, our minds, our guts, our hands, that's where we're working now.
This is the second tier. Absolutely.
You're doing beautiful work there, Curtis.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Check out the piece. What is it again? Oh, Lord.
Okay, let's give due credit. The Equal Justice Initiative, based in Montgomery, Alabama. I really encourage folks, just go to Montgomery and check this out. I mean, it's already a city rich with the history of the civil rights movement. Think of the Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks. It's all there.
Yeah.
Then when you see EJI's offices and you realize that the marker right in front of their office says former slave warehouse, they've taken over that space and created the Equal Justice Initiative.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
It's so good. I mean, this is the future of human relations and getting they're on it, and we're all part of this. So go to Montgomery, check it out, and tune in another year or two.
All right. Well, God bless us all. And God bless you. Curtis Mitchelson, thanks for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for listening. See you next time on the Daily Evolver.
Take care.